Remember guys, every $1 spent on car parts or merch over at powerjdm.com gives you 1 entry for your chance to win this mid-engine Eclipse. All right, ladies and gents. Welcome back to another video with the mid-engine Eclipse. In the last video, we got the 4G63 all built and put into the car. Today, we're gonna get the car sitting on its own suspension. In order to do that, we gotta do a little bit more fabrication on this custom rear subframe. We gotta add inner tie rod mounts and make inner tie rods, and we gotta mount the sway bar. And then it's just a matter of bolting everything back together. Putting the rear subframe in, putting the front subframe in, putting the rear coilovers, the front coilovers, putting everything back together. So without any further ado, let's get started. I'm gonna start by modifying this thing, doing some more fabrication. Gotta put it back on the jig, do some more measuring. I thought I was done with measuring, but unfortunately not. So let's do it. The first thing we're going to go ahead and do is to mount the sway bar. Half of the factory mount is still intact, so all we have to do is make the other half. So we just kind of have to make a little mount for this thing to bolt to. Well, we got our two, I keep on wanting to say subframe, but it's sway bar mounts. We got our 2 sway bar mounts tacked in. I'm gonna go ahead and unbolt them to make sure that it's possible to remove them. Also, I'm a little sick right now, so that if I sound weird, that's why. But I'm trying to work through it as much as I can. Unbolts, and slides back in, and bolts back in. Cool. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and fully weld these up, and then we can work on the inner tie rods. In order to make the inner tie rod mounts, we have to put the subframe back on the jig so we can actually get an exact measurement. This will be the last jig measurement, I hope. So I'm sitting here kind of playing with measurements that Matteo gave me for the new inner tie rod points. He moved it farther forward, farther in, and farther up from the factory location to help with bump steer. I think the way I'm gonna do this, I'm going to weld a bolt coming off the top of the subframe, and then I'm gonna build a big 1/4-inch plate off of the steering rack mounts to kind of reinforce that bolt. I think that's the easiest way. I can think of and the strongest way I can think of. So inner tie rod mounts are done. Gotta say, I'm super happy with the way this came out. Not super happy with my voice, but that's all right. You know, we welded the studs to the subframe and then we built this awesome bracket to reinforce the studs, and it's awesome because the bracket located the studs perfectly and everything looks sick and the tie rods are in the perfect position now. And the other cool thing is that we can adjust the spacers on the top and the bottom of the tie rod to adjust the height of the tie rod. This is at the height that Mateo wanted, but it's awfully close to hitting the top of the subframe, so we might have issues with that. Over here, you can see that the stud is located right next to the hole where the steering rack, used to go through. So we're gonna quickly put a plate there just to reinforce that. And then it's time to put this thing in the car, put the suspension back together, and then build the inner tie rod. Voila. So everything fit, which was good because I didn't test fit the sway bar with the inner tie rod bracket thing, It's close, but it does fit. Subframe's ready to go in. I have to finish welding up the that thing over there. And then we can put this bad boy in here. Bench press this with one arm? Yeah. That's not happening.
If you'd rather me help
here, yeah, you're gonna have to help me here. Here we are, struggling to get this dang thing put together, and nothing's lining up. Turns out the motor mount, the one that came with the car, is longer than the one that came with the new motor. So that explains why nothing's fitting. But it's been a long day. I need to go home and rest, so we'll come back tomorrow, swap out this part, and then it should all go back together nicely. Well, everything is in and it's all bolted together and tightened. Helps a lot to have the right motor mounts. Turns out both the front and the back motor mount were different. I don't know why. But now we can go ahead and put the rear suspension on. Now, for this suspension, obviously we have front suspension in the rear, front suspension in the front. I had to get another set of coilovers. So I hit up BC Racing. They quickly sent me out a set of custom front-only coilovers for a first-generation Eclipse. So, absolute huge shout-out to BC Racing. They don't look any different than our other ones because they're the same. But they do have a different spring rate. It's a custom spring rate. And they are new. Now we've got 2 sets of front BR coilovers for a first-generation Eclipse. If you guys are looking to get coilovers for your car, check out BC Racing. I'll have a link down in the description. The really cool thing about BC Racing, super high quality coilovers, pretty budget friendly. They don't break the bank, and they make coilovers for so many different cars. There's a very good chance that if you have a weird, funky car, they make coilovers for it. So yeah, huge thank you to BC Racing for sending these out. Let's throw them in. So what you guys saw me doing there was taking apart a set of front axles to get the stub shaft, whatever you call this part. Since the front hubs are designed to have an axle going through them, and we no longer need an axle in the front because there's no engine up there anymore, we still needed these to go into the front hubs to prevent the bearings from going bad and to actually make the car drive right. So these are this is just the part that goes into the hub. And go ahead and install these and then put the brakes on the rear and put the car on the ground. The wheels might ka-chow, but oh yeah, beautiful. Look at that. You got a mid-engine Eclipse. Nothing flexes like whatsoever. The axles are nice and straight. Could lower it a little bit more. The wheel is perfectly in the center of the wheel well. That measurement. Everything works. Nothing's binding. The geometry seems like it's working. Although it looks done, we have to make inner tie rods because, come over here. Right now it's got a custom rear steer kit. And obviously that won't work. So we have to fix that. So we're gonna throw the toe daddies on it, make sure the toe's nice and straight, and then build some inner tie rods. They say I have the best eye in the business. The alignment's perfect. It's exactly 67 inches and 3/16 on the front and the back. Now, we don't necessarily know if that's pointing perfectly straight, but it's good enough to build the tie rods. The tie rods are gonna be adjustable, so, yeah. So we have all of our pieces for our inner tie rods. We're using the factory outer tie rod and then a heim joint on the inside, along with some bolts, some left-handed bolts. I calculated exactly how long the bar has to be connecting the two. 8 3/8 inch long. So we come over to the big rack. We have our 1-inch DOM here. We gotta cut two 8 3/8 inch sections. I just finished welding out the second tie rod, and we got the first one assembled right here, heim joint on one, and factory outer tie rod on the other. This thing doesn't have a whole lot of adjustment because the bolts were kind of short, but it should have about 1 inch of adjustment, which as long as we got the length right, it should be good enough. throwing the tie rods on. Gave it a rough alignment with the toe daddies. But guys, I mean, look at this. When I tell you I'm so happy with the results, I seriously, like, this is by far the coolest thing I've ever built. I'm so proud of how this thing's turning out. Being able to see like the axles, the tie rods, everything work back here is so cool. Like seeing it through the hatch and through the side glass is gonna be so sick. And it's at its roughest form. Like nothing's painted. We don't have the exhaust, don't have the intercooler or anything like that. So it's gonna get so much cooler too. Works great. Sway bar is awesome. The tie rods seem awesome. Lining it was awesome. Yeah, I mean, just looking at this thing is I'm so happy with it. You're gonna be able to see the cam gears through the back window. I mean, it's just so cool. Huge thank you to everyone who made this possible. Huge thank you to Mateo for helping me with the geometry and everything. Seeing his geometry come to life was so sick. We have a lot of work left to do, but it's fun stuff like exhaust, intercooler, coolant system. Speaking of which, let me show you what we're gonna do in the next video. It's gonna fit beautifully, kind of like right there.
In your front.
In my front.
Yeah.
Plenty of space above it, plenty of space in front of it. We were originally gonna build like a custom fuel tank, but aluminum is so expensive that it was cheaper just to buy a fuel cell. And we'll have to modify it and stuff, but that's what we're doing next video. And if you want to watch the next video, ahead of schedule, you can click up there, become a patron, support the channel. Otherwise, it'll be live in about a week.